Chris O'Connor here. Join our prestigious curmudgeonly community on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. Also be on the lookout for a Spotify playlist dedicated to this episode. Now let's get started.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. Having sold roughly 70 million albums worldwide, the Australian pop rock juggernaut INXS sold 30 million of those in the US alone, making them the third highest selling Australian act in US history, behind only AC/DC and the Bee Gees. From the mid-1980s to the early 1990s, they were one of the biggest and most popular bands in the world, scoring numerous hit singles all over the world. Yet, in the last decade, and especially among millennials and Gen Z music fans, INXS seemed to be a rather forgotten band, almost a relic of the 1980s. While this is the case for them, several of their peers, such as Nick Cave, U2, and The Cure, seem to enjoy burgeoning reputations as legacy acts that transcend generational boundaries. Why is this? Why have they been marginalized as a relic of their era? Were they, like many other bands, washed away into insignificance by the tidal wave of the American alternative rock movement of the 1990s? Was lead singer Michael Hutchence that much of an annoying, pretty boy frontman? Did their music just not age well? Well, the Curmudgeon Rock Report is here to most definitely refute the latter and explore the former two. We actually think INXS were a fantastic rock band with indelible pop instincts that really stood out from the crowd in their day, and their watershed moment, their 1987 album Kick, should undoubtedly be on anyone's list of the greatest albums of all time. Daniel Springer, an INXS superfan and a DJ on Gwangju, South Korea's English language radio station GFN, will be our special guest as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you In Defense of INXS.
Arturo.
Yeah.
Arturo.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of people out there, let's say baby boomers, who would probably argue that Jim Morrison was the sexiest man in rock and roll.
Right.
And there probably are lots of actually Gen Z kids who would say that Harry Styles is rock's sexiest man.
He doesn't do rock music at all. He does crappy pop music is what he does.
Close enough. Well, hey, here's the thing. They're both wrong. Michael Hutchence of INXS. We are very comfortably married men in our 40s, but I can definitely say Michael wins.
Listen, he was close personal friends with Bono from U2. And I remember watching an interview with Bono and where he talked about, people talk about me being a rock star or a rock god. I'm just pretending to be a rock star. Michael Hutchence, that dude was a professional rock star.
Absolutely. He had the bona fides, man. He walked the talk, and unfortunately he could only walk it and talk it so long.
He walked the talk and talked the walk?
Yes, he did. Yes, yes, he did. And he could only do it for so long. And R.I.P. Michael. But we'll be talking about INXS, and we'll be doing that with our guest and friend of the podcast, Daniel Springer, here shortly.
For all you folks out there, Daniel is a radio DJ here in Gwangju, South Korea, where I live, and he works for the English language radio station. He's the music guy of the English language radio station here in Korea. It's GFN, and he will be with us very shortly.
Yeah, that sounds like a dream job. I want to be the music guy at a radio station. Okay. Well, anyway, with that said, as we always do in these episodes, let us now take advantage, or let's rip the space time continuum and go over into our parallel universe.
i.e., the grunge edition of the parallel universe.
Yep. In the parallel universe, that is a good segue, Arturo, because in the parallel universe, grunge still rules, as does everything else, rock and roll, and everything else that makes you listen to this podcast and admire the curmudgeonly worldview that rock and roll is still king and on the billboards and in the arenas and on the cover of Rolling Stone. And rock and roll still matters. It's not a niche, it is the thing. And especially over there, the thing is grunge. And here in 2023, we've got one very, very new band and one very, very old band that are still proving that grunge can grunge your brains out still to this day. Tell us about this newish record that you'll be covering here in the Parallel Universe today, Arturo.
Yes, straight from the rank, moldy dive bars that constitute the live music circuit in Philadelphia comes Laurel Canyon, a neo grunge band that just a couple of months ago released their self titled debut album. It is a nasty, snarling, angry, corrosive sludge feast of an album that has to be heard to be believed. Imagine if early sub pop label, late 1980s grunge skips the major label purification process of the 1990s and gets updated for the 2020s with a modern lyrical sensibility that reflects the nihilism and disaffection of young Gen Z music fans repulsed by the shallowness and vanity of social media culture and the suffocating ubiquity of vapid mainstream pop culture. Now, with a name like Laurel Canyon, you know this band is being very ironic, with
Yep.
their tongues firmly planted in their cheeks. What you also know after listening to this album is that this band isn't all about noise and feedback. There are some serious songwriting chops here, as the three members of the band, simply named Nick, Serge, and Dylan, I don't know their last names, they like to employ a slurred, dragged out approach to their lyrics and vocal melodies that distract you a bit, but after repeated listens, opens itself up and reveals how catchy, punchy, and tightly constructed these tunes are. Curmudgeonly favorite Steve Albini produced half of this album, with Bryce Goggin producing the other half. And from the opening track, the surging opening track, Dropout, you know the guys in this band expect the grunge comparisons with a wink and a nod in the song's chorus, I Can't Complain, clearly referencing Nirvana's On a Plane. The rampaging Madam Hit the Wire has an utterly decadent lyrical narrative that brings to mind the Velvet Underground's Sister Ray as done by Mudhoney, who we'll talk about later. The tracks Eczema and Victim achieve that rare feat that the vast majority of Nirvana influenced bands fail to accomplish. They assimilate the latter band's influence, particularly the soft verse, loud chorus dynamic, without slavishly copying them by repackaging the style and the energy into something entirely new, fresh, and invigorating with their subtly melodic and slightly psychedelic guitar lines. Indeed, in a curmudgeonly parallel universe rock station, these songs would be huge hits. Victim especially hits the mark with its mid-song tempo change to terminal velocity and its brilliant opening lyrics damning the egomaniacal narcissism rampant in mainstream society. Everyone's a victim, no one's a symptom. Indeed. The album never relents with coruscating tracks like Tangiers and Take Your Cut. And of course, the epically intense album closer Sod, as in Marquis de Sade, where the singer barks out the opening verse, there's a fetus in the vomit.
Wow.
Absolutely perfect. As of now, this is my number one album of the year, and someone should tell the members and call the members of Boy Genius and tell them that this is what real rock and roll is supposed to sound like. Chris?
Yeah, this is what rock and roll, the real variety, is supposed to sound like. A compliment I can give this young band is that after listening to Eczema and then obviously Sod as well, it made me immediately want to go listen to the Muddy Banks of Wishkah. by Nirvana, and especially Aneurysm, which is one of the more breathtaking songs in the rock canon. And so that's the kind of territory that they're evoking with this record.
In a parallel universe where rock music is still in the pop cultural zeitgeist and is not a niche, Mudhoney would be co-headlining arena bills with Pearl Jam, correct?
Correct. They certainly would be. And they certainly still would not be in the same band together. I love this story that you told in our episode when we had Ronan Giavoni,
Yeah.
one of our other guest appearances on this podcast. The story that you told about the guys in Green River going to
Yeah.
see Jane's Addiction, and Mark
Yeah.
Arm and Steve Turner not really getting Jane's Addiction,
Yeah.
which just kind of shows you how unique in that Seattle scene those guys were. Yep, Mudhoney is definitely still a thing. They are one of the great proto-grunge bands and one of the more important bands in the growth of that Seattle scene. Well, hey guys, and hey folks, they're still around. They just released their 12th studio record called Plastic Eternity. This is their first record in 5 years, and the occasion for making it, their bassist, Guy Madison, who replaced Matt Lukin 25 years ago,
Yeah.
during 22, made the decision to return to his native Australia. And that, from what I've read, triggered the decision by Mark Arm and Steve Turner to go into the studio and make one last album with Mr. Madison. And that's where Plastic Eternity comes from. And it's a kind of a weird record in the sense that it mines the territory that you would expect from Mudhoney. I mean, obviously going back to their wonderful. It's actually it really is a killer record. I recommend strongly that y'all go listen to it and find it. Super Fuzz Big Muff
Oh,
from
that's
1988.
it's one of the greatest EPs of all time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is, and it is very very well named because it is super fuzzy and big muffy. And just touch me, I'm sick, which is
Yeah.
their most famous song, is on that. Well, now here, still 35 years later, they're doing their thing. It's still fuzzy, and it's still buzzy, and it's still big, but it's a little inconsistent this time around because in some spots it gets very mid-tempo and proggy and acidy, acid rocky, and
The
then in
first
other,
half. The first half of
yeah,
the album's like
yeah,
that.
the first half is basically like a slow stretch prog album, and then the second
Second
half
half is way tighter.
the second half they remember their Mudhoney,
Yeah.
and it's the second half. It's is funnier. The second half is faster. It's fuzzier. It gives more room for Steve Turner to really do his thing. I mean, there's some really great soloing on the second half of the record as well. So highlights on this record, and again, this is called Plastic Eternity, the album, and it's on Sub Pop. Coincidentally, Sub Pop's they're in a renaissance phase right now. They a lot of albums and a lot of bands are on Sub Pop, more than you would think. The Metses of the world. The only mistake they've made lately is Way's Blood, but we won't go into Way's Blood.
Yeah.
Karen Carpenter Redux. Bleh. But anyway, so they're on Sub Pop. Here are the highlights. The song Almost Everything, which is by far the best song on the first half of the record, and it's this stoner rock at its finest. Fuzzy guitars, funky conga, distorted and echoing vocals from Mark Arm, and trippy, dopey lyrics about being a 14 billion years old infant. It's a good little banger, but it's spacey as hell. And like we said, by the second half of the record, they're starting to sound like Mudhoney again. Starts off with a anti-vaxxer anti-anthem, so to speak, called "Here Comes the Flood."
Anti-vaxxer.
Anti-vaxxer, yes, they really tear these anti-vaxxer people a new asshole on this song. Check out these lyrics are, quote, "What's inside us that's making me squirm? There ain't no virus, it's probably just worms. I'm a man, I'm a horse. I'm man enough to let nature run its course." Ooh, yeah, that's a burn.
Yeah.
The next song after that is called "Human Stock Capital," which has
Yeah.
got this really kind of old school punky, screamy energy. And
Anti-capitalism, pretty much.
yeah, he goes from anti-vaxxer to anti-capitalism, and really, the angrier and more straightforward Arm plays it, the funnier he is, and the better the music becomes too. As I said, Steve Turner really gets to shine on some of these songs, especially my last highlight, which is a song called Crimey and Atmospheric River.
Great title.
Which is a very, very funny title. But it's a groovy little rocker about climate change. Halfway through it, it starts off as kind of a fast, galloping, sort of traditional Mudhoney rhythm. But then halfway through, it becomes mid-tempo prog rock that really would make Caressive Steel era Rush very, very proud.
The only good prog rock experimentation on the album is in this track.
Yeah, pretty much. I do like almost everything though. Almost everything is kind of out there. I guess it's Mudhoney's take. I guess it's more closer to proto grunge than prog rock, but it's these are the two kind of quote unquote slower, trickier things that work. It's Crimey and Atmospheric River and almost everything. So there you go, folks. Mudhoney is still fun and it is still dumb in the good way and is still kicking. Check out Plastic Eternity. Arturo, any thoughts?
I'm applauding because this is the first good album you've recommended in a long time. This is a really good record.
The Drop with Dano broadcasting each and every weeknight on GFN, exploring the entire world of new music, old music, and definitely something different for your radio taste. Check us out on social media. That is at, or Golbingi, as we say around here in Korea, GFN The Drop. Watching a scene rewind out of our
minds. So we are joined by Daniel Springer. Daniel Springer, who are you?
Who are you? Who is this guy? Why is he here?
Exactly.
I'm the host of a show called The Drop. I was broadcasting 7 nights a week. Now it's like 5. We had some budget cuts at GFN, which is the local English radio station in Gwangju here. And thanks for having me on. Hopefully you guys can throw up a couple links so people can check out the show. But
absolutely. The Drop on GFN in Gwangju, South Korea. I'm in suburban Houston, so Gwangju might as well literally be Japanese to me.
Space. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I know Arturo's been trying to get me to visit for years, but hey, now I have the time. Maybe at some point I'll have the money, and I'm now married, so at least I have the company.
Right.
So
well, plus,
who knows?
You only had Arturo as a reason. So,
and I was going to say, and that just wasn't enough. So,
yeah.
On that note, so thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us. It's good to have a rock guy on this Rock Guy podcast, or the iconoclastic rock geek podcast of all iconoclastic rock geek podcasts, the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty catchy slogan. Yeah.
Yes, it is. So Arturo, set us up here. We're going to be talking about INXS, which is a band that men of a certain age revere and remember very, very well.
But women too.
Yeah, and lots and lots of women. But for whatever reason, even among men of a certain age and women of a certain age, they're somewhat maligned. Well, we're here to kind of counter that record. So Arturo, set us up, and then let's get into the back and forth with Daniel.
Yes. 5 myths about INXS, plus a 6th bonus myth that Chris will bring in. But the first myth is that Michael Hutchence was just a poster pinup and model shagging pretty boy. All right. Now, yes, he was pretty. Yes, he shagged hot female models. Seriously, who wouldn't if you were in his position? If I were a rich, famous rock star in the 1980s, I'd be fucking any hot model I can get my hands on. And I don't care how fucking crass and chauvinistic that sounds. Yeah. But anyway, do you know what else Michael Hutchence was? He was a fantastic singer, possessing one of the most underrated and distinctive voices of his era. He had a deep, soulful voice that had range and was versatile in that he really could dip his toes into almost any pop style or genre. And he indeed did so throughout the 17 years that INXS put out albums. He was also a damn talented songwriter, as he co-wrote practically everything with Andrew Ferris. It isn't an insult to call the man the Jim Morrison of the 80s. Daniel?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that he doesn't have a crazy versatile voice necessarily. There are some songs where he kind of hits these areas, and his voice wasn't comfortable everywhere, but unbelievable artist. I mean, extremely talented, just a guy that could do no wrong as like your frontman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, probably one of the most iconic 80s and 90s frontmen of any band you could think of. And the band was totally unique. You got to give it up to the guys actually doing the playing. I mean, they just killed it. I'm an old school guy, so I still call them the Ferris Brothers, but they absolutely murder it. Really, really great band, man.
The thing about Hutchence is he kind of traveled a journey from self-assured to very self-assured to extremely self-assured over the course of 20 years. And you're right, he did have this gift of phrasing and performative. He could find the performative grooves with those spaces in the songs that him and Andrew Ferris wrote. And so just some of even like some of the earlier stuff, like Don't Change, which I always forget is INXS when I first hear it. You think it was like some random like British new wave band, that like one hit wonder band, and it turns out to be INXS. But even like obviously the great one is Need You Tonight. And so he just has a singularity. He's singular as a performer. And that's what he does. He wasn't so much a singer so much as he was a vocal performer. And there was a maturity there towards the end where I think he could say he was a kindred spirit with Mick Jagger. I mean, he had gotten to that level of swagger. And so,
absolutely.
Tremendous. Tremendous frontman. Go ahead.
And let's just set the baseline rule right now. All three of us would have definitely fucked Michael Hutchence. I mean, like, nobody's that straight, okay? Like,
nobody's that straight. I mean, I was reviewing and I was watching old YouTube videos and researching for this, and I just found myself being like, "Damn, that guy was handsome." Like, I mean, it's almost kind of distracting in a way of like,
totally.
Geesh, I got to give it up for him. I'm a happily married guy, but I'm like, he wins.
And one thing you got to say about Hutchence and the band, one of the hardest working bands of all time.
Oh yeah,
dude, they were so
unbelievable,
constantly on the road.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, and the fact that we'll get into it. The way they wrote the "I Need You Tonight" or "Need You Tonight" is just like magic in a bottle, but it's literally band on the run. The way they wrote it. So anyway, myth number 2, sir.
Myth number 2: they were just a one hit or one album hit wonder. This one is
shit,
terrible.
Yeah. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm old enough to remember the 1980s. So were you guys. INXS were everywhere.
Massive.
They were ubiquitous on both rock and top 40 radio, and they had numerous hits. What You Need was a top 10 hit on both sides of the Atlantic. Their seminal 1987 album Kick produced not just Need You Tonight, which hit number 1, but 3 other top 10 hits: Devil Inside, New Sensation, and the beautiful Never Tear Us Apart. And it's not like the follow-up album, 1990's X, was a flop. Suicide Blonde and Disappear were massive worldwide hits, both hitting the top 10 in the US. I know this makes me sound like a grumpy old man, but you really had to either live in the 1980s through the early 90s to realize and know how hugely popular INXS were. They were on the U2 level,
Yeah. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I think this kind of skews towards the American audience, like thinking they're a one-hit wonder, because really Need You Tonight is their only number 1, but they had plenty of, top 40 hits during this time. But if you're just like a super casual listener, you're just flipping on, your radio or whatever, and, that's INXS, you probably hear Need You Tonight. And then you're like, well, I never heard anything else from them. So if you were living in Australia or the UK and thinking they're a one-hit wonder, you're just not paying attention.
Yeah, you had lost at least half your brain cells by that point if you thought that.
Right. I mean, especially in Australia, I mean, they were already like a top band for like a decade.
And it's funny that you started your segment by saying, here's the one thing. Well, the one thing was what introduced INXS. I remember their song, The One Thing, from 1982. That was the most shocking thing of my research on this, that The One Thing was from 1982.
Yeah.
You could not escape that song. I mean, I was 7 years old. And even until like 1990, 91 on those MOR stations that, hey, 70s, 80s, 90s, you would hear The One Thing all the freaking time. And it actually goes back to 82. I thought it was on the same record. I thought it would be like a contemporary with What You Need or somewhere in there in my mind. But no, it actually comes from like album number 4, like in 1982.
INXS, legendary. Now, myth number 3, that they were just a simple, shallow pop band. This is another stupid one. INXS were quite eclectic and versatile musically. Dance rock, funk, punk-driven rock, hip-hop inspired beats, lush orchestral ballads, acoustic, folk-inspired music, proto-electronica. You name any kind of pop style of the 1980s, and INXS did it and did it well. Yes. I mentioned earlier how Michael Hutchence co-wrote all the songs. He was also a very underrated lyricist who had his own unique insight and take on personal relationships and the toll that they take on somebody's emotional and mental state, which is kind of been predicting because of the troubles he would have later in the 90s with Bob Geldof's wife. And considering how his life ended, a lot of INXS's more personal songs carry more resonance when you take all that into consideration. Right, Daniel?
Yes. I mean, the band is unbelievable, but they were truly unique in what they did. I mean, one thing that I always notice about like rock songs that catch my ear, oftentimes they have some kind of element of funk or jazz, like a saxophone, harmonica, something like that. There's some kind of unexpected element going on. And INXS were the kings of that. And the band could just jam. I mean, Harris Brothers and Company could just kill it.
Sure. Awesome.
And, I will say that, like, aside from Kick, they kind of strike me as like a Busta Rhymes phenomenon of rock in that they have these albums, their albums as a whole, even during their peak, there's always like 4 or 5 songs that are like, meh, throwaway, like you don't even remember them right after you listen to them. But there's always like 3 or 4 super clutch jams on these albums, like just unbelievable bangers. And so
when we get into the albums, I'll mention this, but like they were the quintessential singles band. Their singles always were kick-ass.
Oh yeah, and I mean, Arturo's heard me say it that I make a line that Stone Temple Pilots were the Jethro Tull of the 90s. Well, I mean, INXS had kind of the same ability, but they also had some great albums too. I will say this. In terms of the idea of them being simple and shallow, obviously that's BS. Yeah. So for a few reasons, one, you had what's his face there, Kirk Pengilly with his saxophone.
Yeah.
And so you would have these sort of electronic drum machine beats, but even from very early on, I mean, you had the saxophone that was in there that had this sort of unusual, gave this unusual depth or this unusual feeling to, like that kind of new wave-ish rock, Australian British rock. I mean, that was very unique at the time. Yeah. And then that's really one of their things too, is that over time, they went from being a very electronic, sort of very detached sound, and they kept getting more naturalistic and organic on top of, they always had that electronic backbone, but they would keep getting more organic and all of that. Now, they did a lot of songs, and one of their themes was living dangerously, and they made that sound alluring and thrilling. But like you said, Art, they also made it pretty clear that there actually was a lot of danger.
Yeah.
And so, Devil Inside and Suicide Blonde and those types of things, Elegantly Wasted. I mean, it made it clear that there was a toll. And then you got to give it up for them in 1984, where they're getting a hit, at least in Australia, out of a song that the chorus or the hook in part goes, "Dream on, black boy, dream on, white girl, and wake up to a brand new day."
Yeah, it's a commentary on a doomed interracial romance.
Yes, it's interracial affairs is rebellious scandals. And this is the hook of a hit, a big hit, at least in Australia, in 1984. So that's Shallow My Ass.
And produced by Nile Rodgers.
Yes.
Nile Rodgers.
Nile Rodgers did produce those. He at least one record, right?
I think he produced just that song on the record, but he might have produced the whole thing. But that definitely shows where they're at that point in their career. They're definitely like on the rise, getting some notice from big names, and it's hard to find a bigger name than Nile Rodgers.
Oh yeah, Nile Rodgers. That guy's a genius for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Myth number 4.
Myth number 4. That they weren't innovative or distinctive. Bullshit.
Kind of covered that with what we talked about before. I mean, just absolutely.
Yeah, kind of. But the more specifically to their sound.
Yes.
I want to talk about is starting especially with their 1985 album, Listen Like Thieves. INXS crafted a unique and distinctive sound, this brand of funk-driven dance rock that they perfected. Kick.
Yeah.
They sounded like virtually no one else at the time. No one else sounded like them. Anytime you heard an INXS song on the radio, you would know it was them by the opening chords or the intro riff or even the opening rhythm. It's that sound that was so unique that no one else had. Really.
Yeah, especially the way that record opens out. What you need is still an unbelievable jam.
That's a killer first track for sure. I'm not usually a fan of processed guitar or processed guitar engineering, but INXS did it better than anybody. And so that whole sound, that sort of that processed, almost guitar as studio, kind of almost in a box. It was almost like guitar in a box. Like this transportable, sort of out of time, almost out of the space of the song. And they had a real gift for shaping riffs and shaping sounds doing that. And so, I mean, okay, fine. Linkin Park, they could do processed guitar engineering, but they sucked. INXS was great, and they really did kind of innovate that kind of thing. Like I would say, hell, it was basically like them and Rick Rubin in the mid '80s and the late '80s that were doing the processed guitar thing better than anybody in the world.
Special shout out to the band me and my sister used to call Linkin Park because we fucking hated them. We would call them Linkin. Yeah. Linkin Park. Yeah.
How did Linkin Park get into a conversation about INXS?
Process guitars, man.
Engineering, baby. Engineering.
So. All right. Myth number 5, that they weren't influential. I got a lot to say here.
Go ahead.
I'll give you the names of 3 bands. Maroon 5, Savage Garden, and the 1975. Granted, they all suck, but they are very popular groups who have gone out of their way to mention INXS as a big influence on their music. More meaningfully, back in 2010, Beck, yes, that Beck, recruited St. Vincent, Sergio Diaz from Os Mutantes, and all 3 members of the band Liars to, in the span of one day, record a track-by-track recreation of the album Kick. If that isn't a complimentary tribute, I don't know what is. Is it any good? Yes, it's fucking brilliant. It's INXS put through the filter of that classic eclectic Beck style, that subterranean sound world that he specializes in. The average music fan would never guess that there was a lineage going from Michael Hutchence to Beck Hansen. But go on YouTube and check it out and see that it is true.
Yeah.
Daniel?
That is so good. It's funny because that's exactly what I was going to mention. I don't know if you guys have seen Beck live, but that's one of the best concerts ever been
Yeah,
to.
I saw him as part of the Horde Tour in 1997 in Mansfield, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I saw him at the Reading Festival in 2003.
Okay,
yeah, I saw him when I was still in college, so it must have been around there, maybe like late 90s. But I forget the record that Deborah was on.
Oh, that's Midnight Vultures.
Midnight Vultures. Yep. Yeah, it was the tour for Midnight Vultures. That show was unbelievable.
I also saw him
one
in
of the best
Radio
concerts
City.
I've ever been to.
I saw him at that same tour. I saw him in Radio City Music Hall in 2000.
Oh yeah, I was with you there, wasn't I?
I think you were.
Yeah, you were my +1. We went for free. Yeah, I remember that. I was writing for SonicNet at the time, Daniel, and I actually wrote a story about that. And so, yeah, Arturo got to go see Beck for free because of my dumbass. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was working at the Ohio State like student radio. So yeah, I had like a +1 thing going on at the door. And I remember my girlfriend at the time being very impressed. Like we got badges.
You opened up a quick side non sequitur door real quick. Was Mark Roberge in any of your classes?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I had to, if you were at the Ohio State University in the late 90s, hey, OAR was a thing, baby.
I mean, it's like a needle in a haystack. I mean, I think it's 60,000 students there.
That's
a huge school, dude.
Yeah, right.
No, you never know. You never know.
Yeah, you never know, man. You never know. It's very big, but it's also very local. So,
all right, okay, very good. All right, I got you. Myth number 6, bonus myth. Chris, this is yours, right?
Yeah, Midnight Oil was better than INXS. No, they weren't.
No, they weren't.
No, they weren't. Midnight Oil is very storied because, the politically active and fine.
They were basically Australia's answer to The Clash.
Yeah, basically. Blue Sky Mining's a good song. But most of their stuff to me is just like unlistenable garbage, be honest with you. They had a few great singles. There's a lot of, everybody likes to accuse Bono of being insufferable. Nah, man. Not compared to what's his name, Peter Garrett.
Peter Garrett, yeah.
That guy was insufferable, man.
Well, he was also an insufferable dancer. I mean, what was with that whole thing? Not moving his leg, but just jerking his body around like some kind of inflatable ad outside a gas station or something. So weird.
If epilepsy was disco, it was pretty freaky looking. Coincidentally, by the way,
he was also a bona fide politician. He got elected into Parliament.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He's a climate change guy all the way. But no, INXS was a more fun band. They were a more accessible band. They had better melodies. They had better hooks, and
they lasted longer. I mean, everything.
Yeah. Hey, it's Chris. Yours truly, Curmudgeons, record the Curmudgeon Rock Report using a program called Zencastr. And we have used this program since we launched a little over 2 years ago. And much like we have evolved, so has Zencastr. The company was essentially in early startup mode at the time, and, there have been bugs and annoyances along the way. But one thing has remained consistent: the quality and the value for us of the product itself. You see, Zencastr records the tracks of a podcast's participants natively. That means our recording session itself is never subject to the inherent unpredictability of the cloud or the inevitable half-assedness that some all-in-one podcasting platforms will have across their functions. Most importantly, since I am in Houston and Arturo is in South Korea, reliable recordings and excellent capture of our Ars Technica USB microphones is absolutely essential. So here we are now in 2023, 50-something episodes into this curmudgeonly journey. And here Zencastr remains. The company just switched from a credits model to a subscription model. Zencastr, we believe, is headed for big things, and we strongly suggest that you use it to record your own podcast. We now return to our regularly scheduled program. Rock on. So we're still talking INXS with Daniel Springer and yours truly, Curmudgeons are here. And so Arturo, we're talking about this Australian band INXS. We just dispelled some myths. Now give us an origin story. How did this band get started and how did they become the INXS that we began to learn to know and love?
Also, how is it not part of the extended Marvel universe? I don't understand.
Eventually it will be.
They definitely have a comic bookish name, didn't they? INXS.
Yeah,
But
there
anyway, the three Farris brothers, Andrew, John, and Tim, they tend to be portrayed as the core of INXS, but the real creative core was the songwriting partnership of singer Michael Hutchence and keyboardist Andrew Farris. They were high school classmates and buddies in Sydney, Australia, when they formed a band called Dr. Dolphin in 1977. With a name like that, it isn't surprising that they didn't last long. However, older brother Tim and younger brother John invited Andrew and Michael Hutchence to join their band called the Farris Brothers. And as a sextet, they started playing clubs and pubs around Sydney. The Farris family soon moved to Perth in 1978, and Hutchence and the rest of the band followed. They changed their name to The Vegetables.
The Vegetables, I love that.
And then they moved back to Sydney the following year and recorded a set of demos. Serendipity must be a real thing because after performing at a pub called the Royal Antler in one of Sydney's northern beach areas, a guy called Gary Morris approached the band in the parking lot. Mr. Morris also happened to be the manager of Midnight Oil, one of the biggest cult bands in Australia at the time. The Vegetables soon started opening for Midnight Oil and other well-connected bands in the Australian rock scene. And after some urging from folks in the Midnight Oil camp, the Vegetables wisely changed their name to INXS, inspired by the English band XTC. They started performing in the Aussie pub circuit as INXS in September 1979, and very soon their networking and connections paid off as they got hooked up with a manager by the name of Chris Murphy. Murphy was pretty well connected himself as he was able to land the band a record deal with Deluxe Records, an independent label formed by former AC/DC manager Michael Browning. All these Aussies are connected. And the rest is history. Daniel?
Yeah. It's all very local down in Oz. Yeah. It's amazing to think that they've been together, or at least Hutchence and one of the Farris brothers, 71? It's like unbelievable. I mean, they were the Dolphins for a while, but
they were best friends.
It's like a few years later, they become the Dolphins or whatever. The other Farris brothers join them. But it's like, and it's interesting to see, the connection with Midnight Oil and all that kind of stuff. I also didn't know they relocated to Perth until I was doing a little research. Yeah, because that's like the way out. That's the true outback of Australia, way out west. I mean, that's like the only town with over I don't know, 100 people or something. It's considered
that's kind of like being like Salt Lake City,
Yeah, Perth is a huge surfing town. Big into surfing.
Big time surfing town. Yeah. So and the sort of early beginnings, it's kind of funny that you said that, one of their guys or one of their managers had connections with XTC. Well, perhaps it's no coincidence that INXS started their life as sounding a whole lot like XTC.
That will bring us into their first album.
Self-titled.
Their self-titled album came out in 1980.
Which is actually marked as like a compilation on their discography on Spotify.
Yes. For some reason. It is.
Yeah. I don't know. I had some trouble finding it. I was like going through it. I was like, I've never listened to this, but it's not on their albums compilation. It's
which is weird because
a compilation. It's so strange.
I know. In Australia, it was released as an album. It was an album.
Yeah, I mean, it is an album for sure. I mean, they're the only people on it. It's not a compilation. It's some kind of misfiling.
It must be because I noticed that too, and I was like, wait a second, that's the debut, and it's funny, and I enjoy that the first song that you ever hear from the band is "On the Bus," so like what's that Drake line? Started from the bottom. That's the bottom.
Right.
This first album, I have to admit, INXS's recorded career gets off to a pretty inauspicious start. You can definitely hear the influence of the angular, quirky, offbeat new wave pop of XTC, but only if that XTC sound was straightened out, streamlined, and maximized for the most boring commercial appeal possible. It manages to be both vanilla and derivative. Nevertheless, there are some interesting nuggets here. The single "Just Keep Walking" is one of the few tracks on the album that really truly captures the XTC spirit with its social commentary on the soullessness of gentrification. Doctor, with its stop-start groove and staccato reggae guitar, kind of points the way to the versatility the band would show later on. Jumping and roller skating have some pretty cool tempo shifts. Recommended only if you're a completist fan and are fascinated to hear a band you love start to figure out their sound. Daniel?
Yeah, it sounds like they're kind of just caught in between the popular sounds internationally and locally in Australia. I mean, they basically sound like, a pub rock band.
They do.
In between like punk a little bit and ska, especially. They have a very ska style sound to me in a lot of ways.
There as well.
Especially those first couple records. That definitely is an influence. But let's face it, they sound like 20-year-old kids who are still figuring out who they are at this point.
It's like new wave, ska, rock, synth pop. They're kind of an amorphous galaxy getting formed right after the Big Bang, just like a cloud of gas, and they don't really know what's going to happen or where it's going.
Exactly. 20-year-old kids in 1980.
Like Arturo said, there are little glimpses where you're like, "Oh, this is a pretty decent song. This is a pretty decent song." But I find that with both this and their sophomore album, that's kind of the case.
Speaking of that sophomore album, Underneath the Colors from 1981. Now, you mentioned, I'm going to go back to something that you said, Daniel. Like on this second album, INXS start to shed their XTC fixation. And like you said, they aren't quite there yet, but you can hear the band starting to zero in on something approximating an original sound. The first track and the lead single, Stay Young, was their first big hit in Australia. And it was in the top 30 singles chart over there. And it's easy to see why. It's a bouncy, funky, catchy number with that gliding guitar riff. And it captures the accessible side of post-punk. And they go further into the funk with the minimalist groove of Underneath the Colors and its commentary on nationalism and xenophobia. The consistency in their songwriting isn't there yet, especially apart from their singles. But nevertheless, you can hear like where they're going, slowly moving away from new wave pop,
Yeah, definitely. No doubt about it. And it's getting a little less, there's less ska, I feel, in the second album. You can feel them kind of coming into the synth and a little bit funkier side of things, but still not quite there. We're eons later in the after the Big Bang, but still not quite fully formed,
But the blueprint is there. I mean, the thing about Underneath the Colors, like the first track and then the title track, especially with the guitar that slightly trails the electronic drum beat and those rhythms. This is where they start to slither. You start to get the pendulum
again. Slither.
Yeah, this is like your favorite word. Is this like Sesame Street?
This is the word of the day.
Yeah, this is the word of the day. They're very slithery, but you also get with the saxophone and the romantic vibe, or the what would you call it, the alluring vibe that they obviously built on for years.
Chris, it's called sexy.
So they start. The blueprint is here, and so they've built if there was such a thing as an INXS template, at least through Kick. So from here through Kick, there was a template that they were working from. This is where they first introduce it, and so that's what makes it neat. And I actually do think that the title song is a very, very strong song. I mean, that's got a swing to it.
Got a groove.
Yeah, I agree. Stay Young is pretty good too. One thing to note, and we forgot to mention it about the first album, is they were doing like 2 gigs a day and recording at the studio from midnight to like 5 a.m., 6 a.m.
That's
because it was
crazy.
cheaper. I mean, you want to talk about a hardworking band. But the other thing is, by the second album, you start to see them getting noticed by some people who kind of matter, like some management types and A&Rs and stuff like that.
Mhm.
You start to see them building a profile for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could see why, because again, there's a progression between those first two records. Like the first record is like a 20, we're a bunch of kids trying to sound like everybody else. And a year later, it's like, okay, we're starting to figure it out. And like, oh, okay, well, those guys are pretty good. And that kind of leads them to their break, with which came a year later, right? Right, Artro? I almost said
A
right,
year
Chris.
later. That's right. Good transition there, Chris. Shabooh Shoobah from 1982. Here is where I believe INXS start to become INXS. And their sound starts to crystallize. Their third album is their first album for a major label, Warner Brothers. And while their songwriting isn't consistent enough to fill up a whole quality album yet, frankly, an issue not uncommon to most bands and artists of that era.
Well, yeah.
It's with the singles that this band starts to soar. The sexy swagger of the leadoff single, The One Thing, is unbelievably infectious and one of the most perfect pop nuggets that entire decade had to offer. It's no wonder it was not only their first massive hit in Australia, but it also hit top 30 in the US. To Look at You is a sultry, brooding track of understated power, the kind of which the band would become master craftsmen of soon enough. Don't Change shows that INXS could do rousing anthemic pop rock, aspiring to arena status. And not come off as cheesy in the process, unlike a lot of other bands of that time. A good band is starting to find the recipe to become great here, I think. Daniel?
I agree. I agree. The One Thing, and this is kind of setting the pattern for INXS and their albums in the future. They always open with a bang.
And it's always the single too.
It's almost always the big tune on the record. Yeah, the single that was released in the run up, and you can see them again forming and getting noticed by a lot more people. I believe they were trying the managers were trying to shop this around to other producers in the States so that they could go over to LA and record it, but they didn't quite get any interest from any names. And so they still went with their usual producer, who ended up being their producer.
Yeah, I was going to say
the
10
entire
years later.
ride.
Yeah.
Mark Osprey, I think was his name. But,
something like that. Ospey or something like that. I can't quite. Opitz.
Mark O. Yeah.
Mark Opitz.
Marco.
Marco. Yeah. Marco. But Opitz. Yep.
Yeah, this is a decent album. I mean, getting through the research on this show was a bit of a slog for the first two albums, but I mean, you got to appreciate the first album for like how they're living, man. I mean, 2 gigs and then going all night into a studio session, unbelievable.
Back in those days, you would do a residency at a club.
Right.
Contract to do like two sets a night.
Right.
Maybe 3.
So
I know.
Maybe that made it easier, but still, man. I mean, everybody's
that's
rolling
just
in
crazy.
the studio, like I would guess half in the bag and then going all night with it. But you can see them really coming into their own here for sure. And then the next record is like, okay, these guys are like arriving.
And then with this album, like you mentioned, Art, it's a very inconsistent record, but obviously, The One Thing, that's where they first got their hold in America, because again, The One Thing got in heavy rotation on MTV, and then Don't Change is one of the songs that like younger folks who might not remember this band at all, but they do know the movie Adventureland. Which is Jesse Eisenberg, Kristen Stewart throwback. We worked at an amusement park one summer movie, and prominently features "Don't Change" in it, and so that would be the one song. And like I said, it's such an arena rock anthem type of song that like literally I know the song, and you hear it all over the place. It's like a very licensed song.
Yes.
I always forget it's INXS because it sounds like anything but the INXS we came to know and adore. And and it kind of proved early on that they had a versatility that, again, we'll get to it 10 years later, really, really shines through.
And they also, that's another thing. You start to see even stuff from their earlier albums from now. After a while, like it'll start getting licensed, like you said, for like films and stuff like that. But this is like the sign of a young band that are starting to get noticed, you know, like they put out the album and then like 6 months, a year and a half later, it gets licensed for a commercial or a movie or something like that. So you're starting to see this with both their sophomore and, you know, their third album.
And that actually did happen to them early, because I remember like Don't Change, it didn't become a big deal on MTV per se, but it was around. It was just one of those around, it was like one of those lurking songs. It's kind of like Blister in the Sun, where it's like you don't know where you know it from, but you know it.
You're just like if you were me in high school, you're working at like a pizza restaurant and making pizzas, and you're like, how do I know that song? Like, you're not really paying attention consciously to the music that's just coming out of the commercial radio there.
True enough.
Dusting over the customers, you know.
Absolutely.
All right, the next album, 1984, The Swing. Now, one of the missing ingredients in the INXS formula that we all know and love finally arrives on this album: dance beats. And they bring the funk as well. As with the previous record, it doesn't hold up as a whole album. Again, inconsistent songwriting. But boy, oh boy, do the singles kick ass. We talked about Original Sin, the song you mentioned. This is an intoxicating dance pop song with its tragic story of a doomed interracial romance. I Send a Message is a razor-sharp electro-funk workout. And Burn For You is as indelible as 80s pop music gets. Even the album, the title, one of the album track, Melting in the Sun, grooves with this almost proto-industrial feel. And the same year that Depeche Mode were starting to mine that territory. These excellent singles were all top 10 hits in Australia, leading it to go 6 times platinum in that country. However, despite the same singles charting moderately in the US, industry eyebrows were raised when the album went platinum in the US, opening the doors for their future pop chart domination. Daniel?
I mean, you just can't deny Nile Rodgers being involved in Original Sin, and then their career just kind of taken off. I mean, and it's an amazing tune. One thing I do notice about this album is like the inconsistency of mastering that's going on. You go from one tune to the next, and it's like, and this is something I noticed just because, you know, the radio thing, and I'm always having to kind of master the tunes for radio play. The difference in volume level and the quality of production from like
it is a pretty erratic record.
To the rest of the album is very noticeable, but overall a pretty good record. I mean, definitely inconsistent. They're not quite at Kick yet.
So, they're not there yet. Yeah,
you know, I don't want to ruin the ending or anything, ruin the big surprise, but I mean, Original Sin is a genius tune, man. And at a time, you know, in 84, where, attitudes are changing on race, but things are still rough if you're in like any type of interracial or interethnic marriage or relationship. I mean, so it's good to see something like that become like an anthem. And it's, you know, it's a genius tune.
Sure. Answer a trivia question if you can for me there. Who sang backing vocals on Original Sin?
Kylie Minogue? I don't know.
It's a little early.
Yeah, it's a little early
playing
for
the
that.
flute? No?
Yeah, she would have been like 12 at the time. Daryl Hall.
Hall and Oates.
Yeah, because they kind of were opening for Hall and Oates and a host of other people on like their respective North American tours. Like they do like part of the tour, but they were opening for Hall and Oates at this time too, which is amazing.
On this episode, we defended the career and underrated legacy of INXS. For the next episode, Chris and I will discuss a bigger and even greater band, REM. They're often regarded as one of the 20, 15, or 10 greatest American bands of all time, depending on which music critic you're reading. They got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in their first year of eligibility back in 2006. Yet why is it that they aren't remembered by millennial and Gen Z music fans with the same reverence that they afford artists such as the Beatles, David Bowie, Led Zeppelin, the Sex Pistols, the Smiths, Nirvana, or even Radiohead? A band that were living legends in the 1980s and 90s have now been, in the eyes of many, relegated to the status of very successful also-rans. As hardcore REM fans, yours truly Curmudgeons will not let this stand. Music critic, published author, and REM biographer Tony Fletcher will be our very special guest as the Curmudgeon Rock Report will bring you REM. Remember those guys? The next album, Listen Like Thieves from 1985. Now, if the previous album, The Swing, put them on the international mainstream map, this is the album that really broke them big on the strength of the dance rock masterpiece single, What You Need, which was a worldwide smash hit, even going as far as number 5 on the US Billboard chart. One notable aspect of this album that marked it as different from previous INXS albums, as evident from the record's other excellent single and big hit, the stampeding title track, Listen Like Thieves, is how much of a guitar-heavy album it is at times, and how at others, the guitars and keyboards meld into, along with the funk-inspired dance rhythms, really a crystallization of the INXS sound. Hell, even some of the non-singles album tracks are pretty great. Shine Like It Does is a mid-tempo beauty that serves as a great platform for Hutchence's best crooner voice. And Same Direction rocks on with a persistence that predicts some of the alternative college radio sounds of Love and Rockets and the Smithereens.
Oh, yeah.
A good overall album that would have been better had Andrew Farriss and Hutchence authored all of the songs instead of farming out some of the tracks to the other Farriss brothers. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. well, no, you have it right. I mean, sorry to cut you off, Dana, but you're right. This was the last record that really was a democracy, where they gave democracy a shot, and then after that, it was all Hutchence and Andrew Farriss from there. But alas, we do get the guitars that get added to the drum machines and the sax, and we are now having the stage set for the breakout of not just the INXS formula, but the INXS vibe, or the INXS trademarked sound, correct?
Yeah. It's interesting to note that Chris Thomas, who was the producer on this record, oh man, I mean,
produced Queen.
Pink Floyd, the Sex Pistols. I mean, it kind of goes on and on. Elton John, he felt after they had completed the album that there wasn't a killer cut on the record. Yeah, and that is what inspired What You Need. He kind of had like a funk idea and like a track that he was kind of working with, and he's like, what do you guys think about this? What can you do with this? And that's where, What You Need comes from. And that, to me, is like the album completely. I mean, it ends up being the first tune on the record, and it's interesting to see kind of Chris Thomas being the inspiration for that. And I feel like he was right. You get past What You Need, and there's not like something that really grabs you on this record. I mean,
not with the same energy, at least.
Not with the same energy. It, like, he was right. There's not like a killer cut that would have been like a huge hit like What You Need on this record, and it was really it's really an interesting look into the production process.
Yeah, best thing I can figure, by the way, is that like What You Need is obviously their first that was their breakout hit internationally, and but it's also one of those things that, like, and I think a lot of bands end up doing this, mostly for the worse, but in their case for the best, where you end up with a huge hit, and so you spend the next few years like chasing chasing down that hit, or it's like, okay, it's chasing the next hit, or let's do that again, and that becomes kind of your, okay, top that, okay, and that kind of becomes the idol. But for them it worked, and so it's like what you need gave them the idol. It was a hell of an idol because they exceeded it and then some.
Yeah, and I gotta point out that the producer Chris Thomas didn't feel like he had a killer track, but it's Andrew Ferris who'd been working on just kind of noodling around with this tune called Funk Song Number 13. That becomes what you need. So they had finished the record, and Chris Thomas is like, man, we don't have like a bomber track on here. And so,
there you go.
Andrew Ferris is like, well, I've been working on this, and it turns into what you need.
Right.
Amazing.
Yep. How about it?
Speaking of bombers, coming up next, Kick from 1987. And so it is that one of the greatest, most quintessential singles bands of the 1980s, at a time when they were already Australia's biggest musical export with a large international following, this is when they decided to up their game by making an album of seemingly all singles, one that can be listened to from beginning to end without pressing skip on the CD player or fast forwarding on a cassette player. The result was Kick, an album that was their Born in the USA, their Joshua Tree, their Thriller, their Rumors, the album that brought their popularity to arena rock proportions, and more importantly, a stone cold classic that to this day stands as one of the greatest pop and rock albums ever made. Seriously, where do you begin with this album that went top 10 all over the world and went multi-platinum practically everywhere? You got the groovalicious, very Prince-esque Sex on a Stick erotica of Need You Tonight. There's the pulsing, brooding, tense The Devil Inside with one of the decade's single greatest guitar riffs put to record. There's the gorgeous, aching ballad Never Tear Us Apart, which started out as a Fats Domino-esque rolling New Orleans-style number before the band wisely decided to add a string arrangement to the track. There's New Sensation, a spiritual successor to the dance rock splendor of What You Need that actually manages to perfect INXS's patented dance funk rock formula. All of these songs went top 10 in several countries throughout the world, and even more impressively, it's the album as a whole that marvels in its versatility and breadth of styles. Even hip-hop with the track Mediate that immediately follows Need You Tonight. And to think, after submitting the record to Warner Brothers, and according to manager Chris Murphy, the label honchos hated the album because it was, quote unquote, too black sounding, and actually offered the band offered the band $1 million to go back to
re-record it
and make another album.
And so I think it was actually Atlantic who were
This proves that INXS, they were ahead of the curve in blurring the lines in the 1980s between what was perceived as white and black music,
Yeah. But the story of that, it also kind of shows like, the brilliant, what happened in the 80s. It was college rock. It was college rock radio that really was the most important force in musical distribution and musical tastemaking in the 80s, because after...
Yeah, and into the 90s too.
Yeah, and into the 90s, but that story that you told of them getting rejected and offered $1 million to go re-record it. Well, what management does is that they approach the college marketing wing, or the college rock marketing wing of the label, and they worked the college angles, and it took off at a few of those stations there. So that's how they were able to sneak it in the back door. And finally, the label was like, okay, fine. And then of course it becomes this huge hit. Need You Tonight. Absolutely fucking perfect song. That the tension of it, that minimalist sexiness, and the performance aspect of it from Hutchence. Now, I've said it on this podcast, and I've been saying it for years in just private conversations with Artro. All of us have 1 3-minute pop song in us, one perfect 3-minute pop song. All of us. Yeah. I don't think none of us have written ours yet. I don't think. But we all have one in us. This is theirs. How perfect is it? It's 3 minutes and 1 second.
It's just perfection.
It is a perfect 3-minute, literally a perfect 3-minute pop song.
Yeah, well, it also spills over into Mediate too. I mean, it just continues, and it's still awesome. And actually, for the longest time, I thought that they were the same song.
I want to share this is actually from a review from a very good reviewer, and too bad it's on Pitchfork, but a kid named Alfred Soto, he's about roughly our age, but writes for Pitchfork. And he did, I will say this, the best stuff on Pitchfork are their retrospective reviews that they do every Sunday. They do a retrospective essay.
Yeah, I keep up with those.
And they're very, very, very good. Especially a guy named Stuart Berman writes some really good ones. But Alfred writes this one about Kick, and I think it was in 2017 for the 30th anniversary. But he has a great line in it about Need You Tonight. And he says, quote, Hutchence turned in a performance that was a karaoke version of itself. When Bonnie Raitt covered it in 2016, she didn't even try to compete. She didn't have to. All Need You Tonight requires is a performer who understands the folly of out-singing the groove.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the Bonnie Raitt cover from 2016, Alfred is right. Bonnie Raitt just does it straight. It's Bonnie Raitt does Michael Hutchence, but with her guitar style and all that. So it's done as a Bonnie Raitt song, but she doesn't do Bonnie Raitt. She does Michael Hutchence, and it works. It's a fun ass cover. So go check that out, folks. Bonnie Raitt's cover of Need You Tonight. Yes, that is a real thing.
I don't think it's hard to sing that tune.
No, it's not.
It's very subdued,
but it's fun.
And that's I think what makes it really identifiable, and it's part of the greatness of that song is singing it is accessible. You know what I mean? And you can just sing along with it. I mean, there's a couple points where Hutchence hits like some higher registers a little bit, but most people can just belt it out like that too, I think.
Yeah. You know that whole I'm lonely.
Yeah. Amazing.
Okay. Amazing. Arturo, your turn.
Yeah, I love Kick. Chris, you love Kick. Daniel, you love Kick. But there's one person out there who is kind of lukewarm on Kick.
Who's that?
And that is the legendary music critic Robert Christgau from New York's Village Voice, the dean of music of American music journalism. In one of his pocket reviews, this is what he said back in 1988. Quote, that these silly middlebrow hacks should hang in long enough to become stars is the usual music biz fable. That they should do so with danceable rock and roll that sounds smart in the background is one more sign that the world is coming to an end. B.
Yeah. I was going to say, gee, Bob, tell us how you really feel.
I guarantee you he regrets that. You know, he'll have that come back in his dreams late at night, you know, like we all do, where you're just what the fuck was I thinking?
Look, you know, Christgau's a good writer, but Mike Doughty or Doty of Soul Coughing fame had a wonderful line about Bob Christgau. He says, Christgau gets paid to write about his mail. Yeah. So I always loved that. So
I love Kick. I'm not crazy about how this record ends. It feels like incomplete. It feels like they were under some kind of time constraint or something and just, okay, we've got to put it out. It just doesn't feel like it closes very strongly. Like, I don't like the last one or two tunes.
Yeah, Tiny Daggers is kind of lame. So it's kind of...
It doesn't... Yeah. I wish there was.
When the album ends on a throwaway, that's what keeps it from being a 5-star, because it does kind of end on throwaways. But
solid 4.5, I'd say.
Yeah,
you know,
up through the title track, it's damn near perfect though.
Yes, the first 6 or 7 tunes are amazing. One other thing I didn't know about this, the Loved One, kind of that slower bluesy tune. Yeah. They actually originally released that back in like 81 or 80.
Oh, wow.
When they're really early, but they just released it as a single and had never put it on an album.
Huh.
And then it's on Kick.
Who knew?
You know.
Wow. Yeah. Hey, go figure, man. Wow.
Blown away by that little factoid.
Yeah. No, it's kind of funny that you mentioned Mediate. I'm not a huge fan of Mediate, but part of that is only because I never liked the video, the whole Bob Dylan knockoff thing. I always thought that was corny as shit.
I just love being a DJ, I just love segues where the music, you got the continuous kind of dance vibe going on there that, house DJs the world over just love. But I love it when it's on an album.
Yep.
I just absolutely love it. The B-side of Abbey Road and stuff like that. I mean, I just love it when they're putting the effort into it to make it like a continuous, massive piece. I think it's
Olympic
amazing.
feats of engineering.
Yes.
Again.
Well, yeah, with the Beatles for sure, man.
Well, yeah.
But,
Yeah, anyway,
sure.
I think Kick is a 5-star album. I love the way it ends. I love all those songs. Kick is on my greatest 500 albums of all time list. But that's coming at another time.
Yes,
Next,
it is.
1990s X. Now, contrary to popular belief among modern music fans, or at least younger millennial and Gen Z fans, INXS did not fall off the face of the earth after Kick. No, the eagerly anticipated follow-up 1990s X was not a commercial flop. It charted in the top 10 in more than 10 countries all over the world, went 2 times platinum in the US, Canada, and Australia, platinum in the UK, France, Switzerland, etc. With Suicide Blonde and Disappear, the album produced 2 massive top 10 hits in the US and in several other countries. When I mentioned earlier in this episode's parameter setter that INXS were ubiquitous during this era, I meant it. While reviews for the album were mostly positive, some even glowing, the few negative reviews focused on how it followed the same formula as the previous album.
Who gives a shit?
Well, here's the thing. I disagree with that. Anyone with ears not filled with wax or with common sense would know that is utter bullshit. There are 2 big distinctions between Kick and X. First, while Kick featured the band's patented dance rock sound, augmented by a wealth of other diverse influences and genres, the sound on X seems to generally focus on 2 styles: classic 1960s and 70s R&B soul, albeit put through a distinct INXS filter, and the Stone Roses Happy Mondays-esque indie dance sound coming out of Manchester at the time.
Yeah.
Of course, no one will ever confuse Michael Hutchence and the Ferris brothers for being ecstasy-gobbling fiends listening to non-stop house music, although they probably did do a bit of that in their downtime at the time.
What didn't he do?
You can certainly detect the impact of that sound and style on this record. Second, X has a very heavy production sound, particularly with the drums and percussion, making it possibly the heaviest sounding INXS record yet. This does nothing but enhance the already great songs that Hutchence and Ferris were coming up with at the time. Seriously, these guys were on a roll, on a creative roll. Not only were the 2 singles I mentioned great, INXS never stopped being a great singles band, but Disappear and album tracks like The Stairs and On My Way also get beefed up from the slight moderation to the classic INXS sound. All in all, it's a great record and arguably the band's 3rd best. Daniel?
Yeah, I'd say you're right about that. They also add, some other elements that have never been in INXS records before, the harmonica being a very notable part of it. But like Suicide Blonde always reminds me of this certain style of rock that you hear, especially in guys in the Outback and stuff like that. I met this artist last year during the Buskers World Cup named Ben Jans, and he's got this multi-instrumental, even in his Buskers performances. He's, he's just linked up with like 10 different instruments.
One-man band, huh?
He's a harmonobot type of thing, but he plays this very kind of, I don't know how you would describe it, like rolling thunder folk of the highway down there. And this very much is in that category. It's got that like acoustic guitar going on, but a really heavy danceable beat. It's just very distinctive. And the record as a whole, there's probably like 5 tunes that are absolute anthems at the time. I mean, you've got Suicide Blonde, Disappear, By My Side was a huge tune.
Yeah, By My Side's
Tears. Bitter Tears was massive. Know the Difference, I think, was a big thing in the UK and Australia, if I remember correctly. Really great record. I mean, you could argue it's maybe their 2nd best.
I
I'm
mean,
kind of torn. I'm kind of torn between this one and the next one.
yeah.
As far as which is my,
Although,
runner up.
as a spoiler, I'm not. But Suicide Blonde is probably my second favorite song from them, next to Need You Tonight, and maybe objectively their best, because you said it's got this really quirky mix of styles and sounds and things going on, and with great use of reverb on the harmonica, and it has this really kind of cool mix of, like, let's say, like British new wave, California surf rock, and
Yes.
and Detroit funk. I mean, there's like this almost like this like clubby, like almost the club music of the era, 89,
That's
90.
what I was
Blues.
talking
Yeah,
about.
it's amazing.
The Manchester sound.
Yeah,
That's what
like it's kind of the Manchester thing there, but also the surf rock too. I mean, it almost like a little bit of rockabilly-ish tinge, not just with the harmonica, but the acoustic guitar, and the little bit of this skittering riff to it, and it's a very almost eccentric song.
It's mixed really aggressively, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, from the harmonica down to everything. I mean, the way the
I mean, that razor wire harmonica sound, it's fucking phenomenal.
Yeah, incredible, man. Really,
Yeah.
really great tune. I probably agree with you. That might be my favorite INXS tune of all time. If not, definitely like number 2, number 3.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, it's like Need You Tonight,
Really good.
Suicide Blonde, and then about 4 songs on our next record that we're covering. So, Arturo, what came after X?
Yeah.
After X, 1992, Welcome to Wherever You Are. This is the album where INXS's commercial fortunes start to decline. And 2 reasons are generally given. One is that by 1992, the grunge, alternative, indie gone mainstream revolution was on, and the band's brand of danceable pop rock was going out of fashion. Another, and probably more pertinent reason, is that after years of monstrous levels of touring, INXS decided to take the touring cycle for this album off and resume it for when the next album would come out, which at the time was planned for the following year. The combination of the two hit the band hard. I think in the end it was a bad decision because Welcome to Wherever You Are, while being their only number 1 album in the UK, curiously landed at only number 16 in the US and shockingly at only number 2 in Australia. It's a shame, really, because this is some of the boldest, most adventurous, most expansive music of INXS's career. Just like the indie dance sounds of late 80s acid house Manchester informed the heavier, more bombastic sound of the preceding album X, the alternative revolution emanating from the US colored this album with a dark, grimy edge that only enhances the already sharpened songwriting skills of the Hutchence-Farris duo. Contemporaries of theirs, such as U2, Depeche Mode, and REM, were maturing at this time into producing some of the best music of their respective careers, and INXS were really right there with them. It's a sad shame that they didn't have the ears of the mainstream majority that those other bands had at this time. If you listen to the lyrics, and if you read the lyrics to mid-tempo pop soul gems like Not Enough Time and Beautiful Girl, they're actually pretty average. But Hutchence's understated vocals imbue the words with a sense of subtle pathos, longing, and a yearning that seep under your skin and remind you what really constitutes good soul music. Heaven sent and all around rock with a passionate fury the band had rarely, if ever, shown before. Baby Don't Cry is the kind of rousing, arena-filling R&B soul mantra song that INXS always hinted at, but never really followed all the way through. Closing track, Men and Women, is this track of simmering, introspective art rock that the band had never shown before. It's a startlingly brilliant album and easily, I think, the second best album in their entire catalog. Daniel?
I don't know, but here's the thing. Like, okay, so we've all said, Kick is this great album, and it's my favorite INXS record. I make an argument objectively for this is their best. And it's definitely their boldest in the sense that they just outright abandoned a template.
Yeah.
And kind of, they really went outside of a comfort zone, and they were just trying. They were trying for things, and they were they were looking for what was next. And I think what it was is that they had gotten so confident and assured, at least that partnership of Hutchence and Ferris, from what I've read about the record, that essentially it was Opitz and Hutchence and Andrew Ferris were like basically made the whole record. Everybody, in terms of the creative contribution and the direction to it, because everybody else was going through personal dramas of one kind or another. And so you think of it as an accomplishment. I mean, just to have Heaven Sent, which is another one of those licensing Hall of Fame type of songs that you hear all over the place.
Like you don't really know the tune, but it comes up everywhere.
Yeah, yes. and then it comes in there, and so you're familiar with that. But Not Enough Time is just brilliant. I mean, that's a beautiful, beautiful little soul ballad. Kirk Pangeli ended up marrying the backup singer, from what I read, and so obviously it compelled him just as much as it might compel us as listeners. But like Beautiful Girl has got that really clean, crisp pop sound, and like you said, Art, it's Hutchence is he's not so much playing a character, he's not doing the slithering thing as much anymore here. It's more.
He's brooding. He's brooding.
Yeah, it's brooding, but it's also, it's brooding, but it's heartfelt too. And so there's real pathos, there's real soul, and it's sort of the culmination of their journey. So you step outside of the template, and now they're comfortable enough as artists. And look, at this point, they've made it. So what do they need to stick to a template for? They're at the dance. They're at the top of the dance. One other point is they're also a victim of bad timing here. As we have Daniel, we have an episode in our catalog called "The Dregs of Nirvana," and but we make a point. We had a couple of records, but "Death by Nirvana" and "The Dregs of Nirvana." Well, this fits into the "Death by Nirvana." That's
unfortunately,
yeah. So go back and listen to our "Death by Nirvana" episode. But INXS kind of fits into this.
It's a list of 10 bands / artists whose careers were either irrevocably changed or ruined by the alternative and grunge revolution.
Yeah. But it's mostly like the hair metal bands. It's mostly like the Poisons and the Warrants and Genesis. Actually, it's
usually the bands that were trying to do rock. In the 80s template, but they couldn't make the switch because they just weren't grungy enough. Yeah.
But now, like I said, the second half of 1991, you get the Black Album, you get Blood Sugar Sex Magic, you get Nevermind, and you get One. I mean, essentially, those are not 1, 10.
10.
Yeah,
10, Pearl
Jam. 10. I know. Well, U2's Octung Baby came out around the same time, but basically,
don't worry, I'm not a Pearl Jam guy. Who cares?
Yeah. Well, there you go. 1, 10, 100, 15. I don't know. But you take that collection of albums, they all hit, and so now this is what MTV is, and so now there's just not enough room for INXS and like even Def Leppard, who they had a halfway decent single that came out around that time, but they couldn't get in heavy rotation on MTV. Why? Because all the Seattle bands and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Metallica were dominating the airwaves, and INXS fell into that, and so they come out with probably
Def Leppard had another problem. They terminally suck.
Well, don't you find it suspect that nobody in England, where they're from, gives a fuck about Def Leppard? Like they're only popular in the States. Exactly. That is a red fucking flag. You are just a label and A&R created nightmare that we just had to deal with on the charts for a while. I mean, definitely a talented band, whatever, but is anybody really like a super hardcore fan of Def Leppard? Like. Yeah, well, the other thing is, I don't think it was really grunge that killed off INXS. I think it was a taxi driver giving Michael Hutchence brain damage late at night.
And that's where we get into it.
That's what's upsetting about this album is because they were going in an interesting, brooding, rich velour direction, and then it's all over because Michael Hutchence was basically.
Yeah, which one? Yeah, which one he wants to tell that story? What's the story like? That basically,
I just watched the documentary about Michael Hutchence a few days ago. What happened? Yeah. He was in Amsterdam hanging out with probably one of his several girlfriends or whatnot.
It was who was Christina?
Helena Christensen.
Helena Christensen. That's right. Helena Christensen. They were in her hometown.
They were in Amsterdam, and they were on this really small, narrow street. Hutchence may have been drunk or stoned or whatever, but anyway, he was eating pizza. He was eating a slice of pizza, walking down the street. It's a very narrow street. And there was a taxi driver right behind him and was honking him, like, get out of the way. It's a narrow street. And Hutchence was like, oh, whatever, eating his pizza. The taxi driver got out of the car, punched him. But when Hutchence fell, his head hit the curb.
Yep.
And it fractured his skull and it damaged his brain, some of the nerves in his brain, to the point where he lost his sense of both smell and taste.
Jeez.
Yeah, can you imagine?
He lost his sense of smell. He lost his sense of taste. And on top of that, because it's it's head trauma. If you know anything about
impulse control. Yeah.
If you know anything about CTE, people who suffer from long-term brain trauma, they have extreme mood swings, which are normal 1 minute, and they're like either violent or angry or just upset the next minute.
Yeah.
And Hutchence became emotionally and mentally unstable.
Yeah.
And, it had an effect on the band. It had an effect on his relationships with the rest of these guys who were essentially his best friends.
Yeah.
And it had an effect on his personal romantic relationships. And then it just kept going and going, and he got more and more depressed. Following this album, by the mid 1990s, Hutchence got also depressed, more and more because the band wasn't as popular anymore. So one thing stacked on top of another. Really bad romantic relationships, his band not being popular anymore, him losing confidence, and him just being mentally unstable, and eventually he killed himself.
Yeah, he suffers brain damage and hooks up with Paula Yates at the same time. Bad combination.
Shout out to Bob Geldof, who'd probably be the one person on earth who wouldn't fuck Michael Hutchence, but he did end up fucking him in the end.
Well, maybe at one point he did until he stole his wife.
He was into other styles of screwing.
Yeah, there you go.
It's just kind of a shame because it's interesting to see the direction they're trying to go in at this point. And while it might not have been as popular as the stuff they put out before, it was still interesting. And I don't think the aim of the band, and especially not Hutchence, was to be this big time pop band forever playing like stadium rock. I mean, I think for the tour of this album, they actually played like smaller venues and stuff like that. Of course, the label people were flipping out saying, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Yep.
But I think he's kind of, they're going in this conscious direction, but then, he smashes the front of his head on a curb in Amsterdam, and it's kind of over. And you can see the product of the band's total discord from his brain damage and.
Oh yeah, the next record, which Artro will talk about, with the exception of one song, only because it's fun, was terrible.
Yeah,
and both of them. I can't even remember tunes that like fucking Ray Charles and Christy Hynde were on.
The Ray Charles song is great. I mean, that's the one song I like.
Sucks. So bad.
Yeah, let's slow it down.
Let's get to those albums. Full Moon, Dirty Hearts from 1993. I mentioned how the band's previous album, Welcome to Wherever You Are, that we all love, was influenced by the alternative rock movement of the early 90s, in that their patented dance rock sound emerged with a darker, dirtier edge. For this album, INXS completely throw away any semblance of their classic sound out the window and totally immerse themselves in alternative rock with shades of electronica thrown in. Is it any good? The results are very mixed. When generational contemporaries such as Depeche Mode and U2 made their deep dive into alternative rock, 1993's masterpiece, Songs of Faith and Devotion for the former, 1993's nearly perfect Zooropa for the latter, the results were inspired and innovative. However, INXS's similar approach on an album from the same year sometimes comes across as contrived and forced. Worse still, the Hutchence-Farris songwriting partnership comes up disappointingly short of arresting, memorable songs and a bit long on uninspired lyrics on several of the tracks. Where the hell are the catchy melodies? Where are the hooks? Nevertheless, this is still INXS, and even at their most uninspired, they can still produce some cracking singles.
Yeah.
The Gift has a menacing, sped up
Yeah,
trip hop.
that's a
groove.
pretty good song.
Time is
alright.
the best. Time is the best song on the whole album, I think, and drives
Yeah.
along like a slick, polished Ferrari with the best chorus and hook on the whole record. I'm Only Looking is delectable Euro trash funk. It's goofy, but I like it, in that sense. And it's an uneven album as a whole that could have used some more time spent on it, if not a little more song doctoring. Daniel?
That gets back to Hutchence's injury. Nobody could spend time with him in the studio for this record. He was insufferable. He was completely bipolar at this point. And you watch Mystify, that documentary. He is just, just wildly roller coastering and swinging from one, emotional state to the next. And they just cannot fucking handle him.
Yeah, but it's also the lifestyle too.
Forget it.
Yeah, it's the lifestyle too, because he's living. They recorded this in Paris, I believe, or in France, and he's living in France at the time. And his model friends and his party friends and his druggy friends and all of
his drug intake increased in this time too because of the head injury.
Yeah, same with the alcohol. I mean, he's drinking, he's high as fuck all the time. I mean,
and
nobody can really deal with him unless he's partying.
Yeah, and then he's bringing his people by there, and so it kind of isolates him from the rest of the band, and there's a lot of alienation and there's a lot of drama. But happy accident. It just so happens that Ray Charles was recording in the studio next door to them, and and so they end up getting him to sing on "Please You Got That," which is a lot of fun hearing Ray Charles sing INXS.
I think it sucks.
I disagree with that. I think that song sucks.
It's fun. I mean, tell you the truth, it would suck if it was just Michael Hutchence. It's Ray Charles that actually adds a level of charm to it, because it's like, wow, Ray Charles is singing white boy Australian music.
It just feels so like forced and contrived, that song. Like,
the song certainly is.
Ray's just in the bag. Go tell it, and it's
it's just like Ray. It's just awesome. Ray having these young white kids. They want to prop me up. Okay, I'll go have some fun, and I'll go humor them. And you can tell, Ray's having fun on the track.
There are a couple grooves on this record that are noticeable and pretty good. As songs, I think it's all just mush, man. It's
for the most part, it is
really nothing.
The Gift is not a song.
I think the tune with Chrissie Hynde is decent-ish. It has something to it, but I don't know.
Yeah, for example,
The Gift is pretty good.
I think you're right about that. I mean, The Gift is not a really good song, but it is a great groove.
Yeah,
and that's good enough for me. If it has a great groove, I can live with it.
Time actually is true for me.
Yeah.
Time is actually a really good. It's the best song on this album, I think.
And
it was the single.
Yeah, the whole thing just strikes me as sub-Ziggy. I mean, I would give this album probably like a D- or something. There's just so much going on in the background that it's completely understandable. You're right. They should have spent more time on this record. But there's no possible way that would have ever happened.
They have like a two-man creative partnership, and one of them is out to lunch. What are you going to do?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, either that, or when he's around, he is insufferable.
He's
half the time at least. Yeah. So it's like the band is already dead, man. I mean, half the group is pretty much killed off. I mean, brain damage is. Can you imagine losing your sense of smell and taste? That must be insanely depressing.
Yeah, go ahead.
2/3 of your connection to the world half of your connections to the world sense-wise are just gone.
Yeah, I have no sense of smell myself. I mean,
really?
Yeah, I have a sense of taste, or at least I do taste things, and they taste like things. I don't know if they taste like you guys do, but so I can't imagine imagine losing both smell and taste. That would be crazy.
It's basically half your olfactory senses, but especially taste, man. I mean, eating is like one of the big pleasures of life. There's there's only so many of them.
Yeah. And
that just kind of takes away 2/3 of the pleasure of eating.
There you go.
The big thing, but I don't know. it just strikes me as just this complete wash of a record that they rushed and kind of put out, and it feels like a record that they were doing some kind of, okay, we're fulfilling our contractual obligation or something. It feels like a record like that.
That's exactly what they were doing. I think that was I think at the end of this, they owed Atlantic one more record. And so it
was Warner Brothers.
It was Warner. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they owed like one more record to the record label. And so they ended up doing a live record, and then they moved on to Polygram from there. And I guess this is the tragedy. You know, we go into this last record with Michael Hutchence, and they actually were on just a little bit of an upswing with Elegantly Wasted, right? Art?
A little bit. Yeah. I think you're right about that.
Let's get into that album. What you think of Full Moon Dirty Hearts, Daniel, is what I think of Elegantly Wasted. If grunge and alternative rock weren't enough to knock INXS off their pop pedestal, the 3 years between Full Moon Dirty Hearts and Elegantly Wasted saw the rise of Britpop, that other huge rock movement of the 1990s. To make matters worse for the general view of INXS as being washed up, at the 1996 Brit Awards, Michael Hutchence presented an award to Oasis for something, and Noel Gallagher went upstage and mouthed off, "Has-beens shouldn't be giving awards to Gunnabes." Ouch.
Yikes.
It would have been poetic justice if INXS bounced back to produce a comeback album to match the quality of X or Welcome to Wherever You Are. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Elegantly Wasted is even more lacking in the songwriting department than Full Moon Dirty Hearts. And sadder still, for the first time, INXS sound like they're recycling themselves. No innovation, no experimentation, just blah. Nevertheless, singles were always this band's saving grace. The title track is probably the only song on the album where INXS's tired but true dance rock formula is beefed up by a decent songcraft via its awesome funk groove.
Yeah.
Don't Lose Your Head, which was used in the John Travolta Nicolas Cage film Face Off.
Love that movie.
Is a slick slice of
Oh my God, fuck that movie. Yes.
Yeah.
It is, but the song was used in it.
I saw that in the theaters. Ugh.
Yeah. That movie. I saw that movie with my Aunt June, and she was completely befuddled. I adored it. I thought it was. I'm one of these people, and Arturo will tell you, like, I love preposterous movies and preposterous TV. The more preposterous, the better.
I
really like that.
I prefer Hong Kong John Woo over his American.
I mean, everybody with like a pulse actually prefers John Woo's Hong Kong, but that movie is fantastic. But anyway,
Don't Lose Your Head. Don't Lose Your Head is an okay slice of neo soul with a nifty gospel chorus. And some of the angriest lyrics that Hutchence ever came up with. Yeah. Unfortunately, those two tracks weren't enough to keep the album from tanking, a fact made even sadder by Hutchence's suicide later in the year.
Daniel, go ahead.
This record, I mean, you can definitely hear and feel the anger of Hutchence and his depression, which, with the legal situation with his kid, shout out to all Peter Pan fans named Tiger Lily, by the way. 22 now, I think. Yeah. One of my favorite and underappreciated characters in Peter Pan. You can definitely hear the anger, the frustration, and just the outright depression the guy's going through, man. He sounds very cynical on this record.
Yeah.
I mean, whereas
think about it. Mental brain trauma, no sense of smell, no sense of taste. He's hooked on all these drugs, on booze. He's in a toxic romantic relationship. The authorities are trying to take the kids away from him because, and probably rightfully so, he's not fit to be a parent at this stage in his life.
Yeah, neither is Paula.
Neither is Paula. His band is sinking. They're not creating anything worth a shit. I want to kill myself too.
Yeah, I mean, the point I was trying to make was, whereas the previous record is brooding by design, it's kind of like this rich velour brooding feeling. This is just angry, and kind of discombobulated. and it just doesn't do anything. Like you said, the singles, they're totally forgettable. I can't even name them. I listened to the record last night. I was like,
I got to admit, I like Elegantly Wasted, the single. And this album is
the only song I like.
This is an uptick from the previous record.
It's definitely decent, yeah.
Because it's, to me, they're not recycling INXS so much as, and again, Hutchence and Andrew Ferris at this point are both living in London. And to me, this is like their take on the Stones. I hear a lot of Mick Jagger, Keith Richards reverence, and obviously not anywhere near as good as that. But I do hear some Rolling Stones reverence in the vocals, especially. I mean, it's like, I think Hutchence, whether he means to or not, is kind of doing an impression of Mick. And then just some of so that makes it kind of, makes me smile a little bit. I like Elegantly Wasted. I think it does have this, like I said, almost that London blues rock kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's another disappointing record. They're a long way from Welcome to Wherever You Are. I mean, it's amazing that band does an album that good, and within 5 years they had like crumpled.
Yeah. Well, I think in either scenario you guys just listed, it's basically looking at a clone of a clone or a copy of a copy. Like that's basically what's going on here. And it's just I mean, it's one of those moments where you listen to a record that you're like kind of wondering, like, was that so, or did it actually suck? And me going through like the mental inventory, I mean, Elegantly Wasted is an okay track. Like, I could barely remember anything else from the record. It was all just kind of an oatmeal, just sloshing away in a part of my brain that I just forget about all the time.
So was it maple and brown sugar, or was it apple cinnamon?
No, it wasn't nearly that good. It was just like gruel that you would serve at a workhouse in England during the Victorian era.
There you go. Yeah, Charles Dickens, baby. Charles Dickens.
Some oatmeal is pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Oatmeal and blueberries is my breakfast of choice these days. So, you know.
Dude. I've basically got frozen fruit in the freezer just to put on, the oatmeal in the morning. But yeah, it's just kind of nothing. Like right after I listened to it, it's kind of like that line from BoJack Horseman where the agent is telling off this guy. It's like, I'm forgetting your face even as I'm telling you off, staring right at it right now. Like it just strikes you like that. It strikes me like that.
Yeah.
Well, here's the point. And I think the main point of this episode, or one of the main points of this episode, yes, these latter two albums kind of sucked, but INXS shouldn't be, as a whole, their whole discography and their legacy shouldn't be penalized for that.
No.
Because when they were in their top form, they were not only one of the most popular bands in the world, they were one of the best bands in the world.
Yeah.
They were a phenomenal band.
Right. And history should not forget them. I mean, that's part of one of our missions, Daniel, in this podcast and the curmudgeonly community. I know you're a part of on Facebook. One of our missions is to point out that there are some artists and some songs and some forms and, some moods and attitudes that should not be left to the dustbin of history. And INXS is one of those.
Look who their generational contemporaries. U2, The Cure, even in their native Australia, Nick Cave.
Depeche Mode just came out with an album too. So
those artists and bands are all like celebrated by younger generation fans. INXS should be as well.
Yeah, they should be.
I think also those contemporaries love INXS. That's another thing. They had from their contemporaries, I mean, whether you're talking about Robert Smith or whoever, they, especially Bono, they all admired, especially Michael Hutchence and what INXS did.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that to me is the main tell. That's
and here's something that I wonder. Do you guys remember there was a reality show in 2004, 2005 called Rockstar that was on CBS? And the hook of this was the Ferris brothers and Pangili, I think, or whoever was around in NXS at the time. It was a American Idol type competition, and I think it was hosted by like Dave Navarro and Sharon Osbourne or something. And the hook of the singing competition was to be the new lead singer of INXS.
Yeah, I
And
think that was that's definitely a show like I saw later on. I thought it was a Canadian show though, or no, a
no, it was
Canadian
on
got
CBS.
a
Yeah, it was on.
Canadian initially won the contest. Some guy
Yeah,
from Canada. Yeah,
yeah, and then they had some other band like the next year, like some other washed up band, but I think it was like gimmicks like that that at the time when social media was starting to form, when they're doing that,
yeah, right.
it cheapens them, and
It
I don't know,
polluted them
like
a little bit. Yeah.
social media is very selective. That one of the bad things about social media is that starting in about 2005, when YouTube hits, like cultural, like communal cultural experience gets cut off, and
Yeah,
so for some reason, like a lot of bands, and a lot of artists made the cut or had comebacks or retro or had reverence, and then some bands just got cut off, like REM, who we're going to talk about in our next episode, is one of those bands, or like INXS got cut off, and there are those bands that we grew up on, that we adored, that our generation, the generation before us, and then like the older millennials all vibed on. But for whatever reason, the social media thing of like just like sort of shallow celebrations, or kind of like A Long December by the Counting Crows, which is a great song, has been now deified and lionized on Twitter. Like for whatever reason, it's like the big hip thing to love. But
Well, to
yeah,
be honest, I'm not a Counting Crows fan, but that is their best song. I
oh, it
think.
is.
yes,
It's an amazing
by
song,
far,
and
by far.
it deserves the deification. But so does Need You Tonight. And so there's this kind of selective deification that social media, the whole groupthink thing or viral thinking. For whatever reason, the NXSs and the REMs, they were just left on the dock, and
Yeah, well, the
that's a
other
damn
thing
shame.
is
Go
the
ahead.
other thing is even though they were around from if you go all the way back to the beginning, 71 in pop consciousness, they're around like 12 years, 13 years, like in pop consciousness,
Right.
wherever, whether you're talking about in Australia or wherever.
Right.
It's a shame. Welcome to Wherever You Are. I think they were going in a direction that could have given them a
Yeah,
transition
I
to
agree.
becoming a legendary band that did have a
Yeah,
comeback. But
yeah,
Hutchence was, just damaged goods by the next record, and they were in a huge social brouhaha between the band members, and it just wasn't to be.
yeah.
So
That was a mess,
I
and
think they're just one of those weird bands that historically are like on the cusp. But yeah, the the reality show contest, who's going to be the next Michael Hutchence, definitely
Yeah.
cheapens them.
It
yeah,
tainted
Makes
them.
them into a fucking meme.
yeah, and
And
yeah, exactly. And poor Michael Hutchence, the guy was so like desperately lonely and depressed that he hung himself from the doorknob of the inside of a hotel room,
yeah,
facing the door,
yeah,
not
yeah,
facing
man.
away from the door, facing the door.
Yeah, he
Uh,
was
that's
toxically depressed. I mean,
that
just,
that's how much he wanted out. Uh,
yeah,
that's just, and it's tragic, and because what a talent, I mean, it's a waste
yeah.
ultimately. But what a great band, and it's been really great talking about them. Daniel, before we wrap up, want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your show and about your virtues and where people can find you, and especially, we have listenerships not just there in Korea, but obviously in the States, and people listen to us in places like South Africa. Tell them where they can find you on the web.
Well, I have, I do my show basically every night. I also post it as a podcast. We'll post the RSS feed or whatever below, along with, I guess,
Okay.
some links to it. But what I do on my show is, well, it's called The Drop. And the main thing
Yeah.
is I try to kind of go over as much as as much of the musical universe in a 5-day period as I can, at least style wise. So Monday, play 2 hours of new music. We kind of cover some like Korean
Uh-huh.
indie and, bubbling under K-pop stuff to end the
Mm.
show in part 4. It's 2 hours every night. Tuesday is all new indie and underground stuff for the full 2 hours. Wednesday, we do like a travel show.
Hmm.
So we go to a different city or country every week and explore the music, explore the vibes, maybe, find some hidden gems,
Wow.
whether it's old or new, whatever. Thursday, the second hour is rock with our man Dan Lloyd, who's from the band Malarkey here. And
Okay.
first hour, I do funk and soul. and stuff like that. So it's always something different each and every night. Fridays, we do interviews with artists. They join us to rock a playlist and talk about, their new album or what they've, what inspires their sound and stuff like that. So I think it's pretty, interesting if you want to keep up with new music. And yeah, that's about it. So
all right.
So Drop. And if you just search for it, the RSS feed and stuff will come up. But The Drop with Dano. There you go.
I got you. Yeah, no, we'll definitely be hooking up sending out the link as part of the show notes and as part of our curmudgeonly community. Daniel, this has been great, man. It's always, hey, you know more about INXS than almost anybody I've ever met. That's a guy that's a guy I want to hang out with and toast beers with. And on that note, folks, as I always end these episodes with, we've talked about our curmudgeonly community. Become a member. Go to facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. It's invite only, but chances are we'll let you in so long as you're allowed within 500 feet of a school. And you can always email us. The email is curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And we welcome any and all love and or hate mail. And we also have a presence on Twitter, which is an increasingly strange place, but we post up there and we pay attention. If you were an 80s metal dude, chances are you have a very, very strong Twitter feed. Paul Stanley and Dee Snider, who've got in trouble this week, but their feeds are really, really fun. Steve Gorman of the Black Crows, Jason Isbell's feed is legendary. And so we follow all those people, and we also like to troll John Rich of Big and Rich because that guy's a crazy, wacko, fascist kind of guy. So fun times up on Twitter as well.